Well, good afternoon and welcome back to another live iThemes training event. My name is Nathan Ingram. I'm the host here at iThemes Training, and I am joined today by Michael Moore. Now, Michael is the Associate Product Manager for iThemes Products. He's been on the iThemes team for longer than 4 years, quite a while now, almost 5 now, Michael, I guess. He's a great guy, full of knowledge on a lot of these iThemes training webinars with us. And today we're talking about iThemes Security Setup Essentials. So, hey, Michael, welcome back. Glad you're with us.
Hey, well, thank you very much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. So this is going to be a lot of hands-on on-screen demo today. The setup checklist we've dropped in the chat room as a link. If you're watching this on the replay, it'll be in the download handout button. You can click that and download it and sort of follow along or use that checklist to make your own. But a lot of folks with already some questions there in the chat. Let me just ask all of you as you ask questions. Always helpful, like Barbara did there, to preface your question with the word question in uppercase. I just make sure that I see it. And as we go with a lot of on-screen demo today, try to drop your questions in as we're going, and we'll see if we can get those answered right there in context. But either way, we'll have a good wrap-up Q&A at the end of today's webinar. As always, the replay for today's event will be available about an hour after we finish. I'm going to go ahead and drop that link in the chat if you want to save that to go back and rewatch. You can certainly do that. But hey, Michael, give us a bit of an overview of what we're going to be looking at today and how we're going to spend the next hour or so.
Excuse me. We're going to go through the different security settings module by module, and I'm going to highlight some of the stuff that I know that people have had confusion with in configuring in the past, and also some of the features that I consider to be pretty important when it comes to locking down your WordPress site.
Absolutely. So again, this will be a very interactive event, so make sure you drop your questions in, and we'll pause around each section and make sure we get all those questions answered as best as possible. So yeah, let's dive in, Michael. Where do we start?
Sounds good. So after you install iThemes Security, the first time you go to the security menu, you're going to see the security check. And then what this is going to do is going to run a couple of background checks to make sure that it can properly identify your server IP. And then what you'll see is going to go ahead and enable the recommended iThemes security features that are known to not cause a conflict. So these are the ones that are going to be able to work in almost every environment without causing any issues. So, and then another thing to keep in mind, if you rerun the security check and at some point you disabled one of these settings, it will re-enable it. So let's go ahead and click Secure Site. And then you can see right now that I am not currently redirecting my site from HTTP to HTTPS. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to activate it, the network brute force protection. And what this is going to do is if any site in the iThemes security network is getting attacked by a specific IP, it'll keep track of that. And once enough people have locked out that IP, iThemes Security will then prevent it from accessing any of the other sites on the in the network brute force protection. So we're going to go and activate that. That's a great feature. And then we're going to close this out. All right. So the next thing we're going to take a look at is take a look at the global settings. Now this is right off the bat, this is one of the most important things that you need to make sure that you do have enabled is the allow iThemes security to write to the wp-config.php and .htaccess. And the reason why this is important is if, let's say that you have an IP that has reached the threshold to be banned from accessing the site, iThemes security is going to be able to write that to your htaccess, because what the htaccess is going to be a list of different server rules. And then this will allow iThemes security to tell your server, hey, we no longer want this IP even being able to view the web pages of the site. Let's tell them to go away. And then the default host lockout message really should, the host is going to be the IP that's locked out. And if you're just locked out, you're still going to be able to see the error message before you hit the ban. And so you can customize this message however you want. By default, it just says error. And if the user's been locked out, which is most likely going to happen from invalid login attempts, you can use either a default message or make it your own. And then the community lockout message is the message that people will see when they've been locked out from the brute force network API. And you want to make sure that you have the blacklist repeat offender enabled, because once you enable that, that allows iThemes security to take a look at this, what it's recorded in the security logs to see who's been locked out. And once they've been locked out, based on the thresholds you set here, they'll be moved to the ban list. And you should go ahead and add your IP to the lockout whitelist to prevent yourself from being locked out or banned. Then you have two different options. We have three different options for log types. You have the database only, file only, and both. I would recommend doing database only, and then if you ever need to export it, you can look up how to do a SQL export in the WordPress codex. But the reason why I would recommend never doing file only is, one, it's going to take up a lot more space on your in your hosting package, and then two, with us being able to store stuff in the tables, we'll be able to keep track of more things, such as invalid login attempts. And then you can set the dates to keep the database. The longer the better, but that is going to be completely up to you. And then once any log entry, let's say it's 60 days, at the 60-day point, that log entry will be automatically removed once it gets to that age. And then right now, excuse me, we don't have any of the telemetry data. We're not grabbing the telemetry data right now. However, it is something that we're working on, and the reason why we would want this is just to see what features people are using, see how people are using iThemes security, so we can make a better product for you guys. Because unfortunately, if we don't have the information, we're making it's just a bunch of guesses, and then we would rather have enough information from you guys to allow us to identify what features are being underutilized. How can we bring those to the forefront to make people aware that it would be advantageous to use it? And then also, if there's other features that like you just aren't using, maybe it's time for us not to spend development time on that and focus on features that you guys are more interested in using. And the proxy detection, was just recently upgraded, which is pretty cool. So if you're behind a proxy, like if you're using a service like Cloudflare or another CDN, this is going to allow iThemes security to, if you have it set to automatic, iThemes security will do a check to see if you are using a proxy. And if you are behind a proxy, one of the problems that can happen is that the IP that hits your site is going to be the same every single time because it's going through that proxy first. So what's going to happen is if you are behind a proxy and iThemes security manages it, it's going to send that request or have the IP sent to iThemes servers, which will then be able to check if it's the actual IP or if it's the IP of a proxy. And the reason why it's important to identify the actual IP hitting the site is that is how you ban someone from the site. So if we're keeping track of the actual IP, and once it reaches the threshold of ban, we'll be able to prevent it from keep pinging your site. And the security menu and the admin bar will just hide the menu for the notification center. Showing error codes, which is what we talked about up here earlier, is no by default. You can turn this on if you want to be able to see those messages, and then you can enable the grade report. Keep in mind that this is based on a grading scale by iThemes security. And if you have this enabled and your clients have access to the security settings, they'll be able to see this grade report. And they may be the ones that say, like, for example, if you're using, if you aren't using two-factor on your site, the grade report is going to grade you pretty harshly. And then now the client might say, I don't want to use two-factor. I find it too inconvenient. And unfortunately, the grade report will then show that you have an F, and then they'll be mad that they have an F, and they won't understand that the F is because they don't want to take the proper security measures. So before we move on, does anyone have any questions about the global settings?
Yeah, a few questions popped in here. The first was from Paul. He was wondering if you do not check the allow the writing to the htaccess and WP config, what happens?
Item security won't be able to write there, but however, if you go to the advanced page and then you go to the server configure rules, right now there's not any set up. So, but you can copy these here and then manually paste it into your htaccess. And you can do the same with the WP config rules and then manually copy those and then paste those into your WP config. However, that means no IPs will automatically be banned. And so anytime you'd have to keep an eye on your banned users list to figure out, is there a new one? Do I need to go ahead and manually update those? So it's possible to manage security without that, but I'm all for automating anything I can to get that off my plate.
Right, absolutely. So is there any additional notification if the htaccess file needs to be updated?
No. If it's just there will not be an extra notification for that.
Very good. Let's see. BG was wondering if in the telemetry data section, does that slow down the site in any way?
No.
All right. I think that
no, it's really it's not something that gets checked constantly all the time. It's just there'll be periodic checks to see if any of the settings have been enabled or disabled, and it's such a small generic amount of information that the amount of data transfer, even when there is a check, it's really minimal.
Gotcha. And one more clarification for something that's there on the screen under proxy detection. You have it set for automatic, and that one underneath says not recommended. So can you just, there's some questions about that in the chat. Can you clarify that just a little bit?
Okay, so iThemes security doesn't necessarily have the best ability to identify if you're using the correct proxy header. However, we didn't want to do the security check scan automatically because this does require it to connect to the iThemes server. And so we don't want, we believe in the opting in of sending your data elsewhere. So just like once we do actually hook into the telemetry server to the security plugin, you're going to have to opt into it, not opt out. And just like this, in order to get the security check scan to handle the IP address, we want you to opt into that just because it would send it to our servers. Sorry, I should have clarified that. That's a great question. Thank you.
Okay,
I'm really
so
glad you asked that.
Yeah, so the setting that folks should use then would be security check scan?
Yep.
Great. All right, I believe...
Thank you very much. I really meant to cover that.
Yep, I believe that solves the questions for that section.
All right, perfect. Move on to the notification center. Like, depending on what you have enabled is depending on what you'll see here. So you'll only see the notifications that for settings that you have enabled. The from email address is the what iThemes, any of these notifications will say, we'll use as a from email. And then depending on how many users you have on your site, you can change who are the default recipient. So anytime you enable a feature or enable a notification and you don't want those features to automatically be sent to a client, and I just want it to be sent to me, from now on, the default recipient will be only me. And then, but let's say that you have some that you don't want to have to be the default recipient, you can change to custom and then select which users you actually want to have receive that particular email. And then let's go down. One thing I just wanted to show you, most of the stuff is pretty self-explanatory, but one of the things I wanted to show you was tags. So under the where you can customize the message for these notifications, you can use these different tags that will dynamically pull in the login URL, site title, site URL, the username of the person receiving the notification. And that way you can have a little bit more ability to customize and dynamically customize them depending on who's actually receiving these notifications. go ahead and save those. And then let's go to 404 detection. Now, what the 404 detection does is excuse me, anytime your server records a 404, it will record what IP has hit the 404, and then it will look back. This is the number of minutes back that that particular 404 will count towards a lockout, and then the error threshold is how many 404s they have to hit within this time period in order to be locked out. Now, there's plenty of reasons why someone might hit a 404 on your site. There might be a broken link. I don't know how many times I've typed in a URL incorrectly, but the reason why it's such a high number in such a short period of time is because what we're looking for is bots who are pinging around for specific file types, looking for vulnerabilities. And so typically with a bot, they'll do that in a pretty quick time, but it's a lenient threshold to excuse me, in the hopes of preventing actual users from being locked out of the site. Sorry, cough break. I'm getting over a cold, but and then one thing here is, like, I know I've seen some tickets come in. People are wondering, they're confused because some of their clients actually have been locked out, and a lot of times, like, I know, for example, like there is a couple different Microsoft URLs. If you have Exchange or Outlook, that on every single page load, it will actually look for that, look to connect to a Microsoft thing, and then your site won't have it. And so you end up locking people out. And in that instance, what you can do is you can whitelist specific things right here. That way the 404s, they'll still be recorded by the server, but they won't count towards a lockout for any of your users. And you can also ignore specific file types that are that can commonly be excuse me, commonly be the source of a 404. Like, for instance, a piece of media was removed from your media directory, but something was still linking to it, but has a low the file type has a very, very low chance of being used to add an exploit. All right, so before we move on to away mode, do we have any questions?
Yeah, so if you can bring that screen back up real quick, the list of file types, the default ones, both the whitelist and the ignored file types, the ones that are listed there by default, that's pretty well, I mean, we shouldn't have to change that, right?
No, you shouldn't have to. But however, we did leave it open for you guys to decide whether or not you need to add any additional file types to that list. But you really shouldn't. Most of the stuff you really shouldn't have to mess with unless you're getting specific 404s that you have then recognized that are somehow broken on your site.
Okay, question from Barbara. She's asking if WIF files can be listed there.
I'm not familiar with that file type.
I'm actually not either. I'm Googling it as we speak.
Yeah, I would.
Barbara, did you just make that up? I don't know what a .wif is.
No, I don't either. I was trying to rack my brain for it, but I'm really not sure what that is.
Oh, okay. All right. So Barbara, okay, I see what that, okay. So a WIF file is apparently a specific kind of file specification that's used in like a weaving machine. So like you can download a pattern or something, I guess. And so some sort of a strange file type like that. That's what that area is for, right? You could put that there, and those files wouldn't be they wouldn't be calculated in the 404 calculations. Is that right?
That's exactly right. I don't ever like to say anything with any amount of certainty when I'm not familiar with it. So I've never heard of that file type, but typically with that kind of stuff, code can be executed using that file type, which is why typically you're not very worried about it containing any like malware or malicious code. That being said, with that type of file, when it sounds like it has some kind of weaving pattern in it that then has some kind of code in it that could be executed on a machine to then automatically produce that pattern for you, it sounds like that could possibly execute code. And so maybe you wouldn't want to exclude it from the 404 detection. Does that make sense?
So that just depends really on the file type. But for most of us in most scenarios, the default settings on that area should work.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay, let's move to the next section.
All right. Excuse me. What away mode does is you can set this up if you know that you're only going to be on your site at specific periods of time and you'll never be on there outside of that period of time. You can set up an away mode schedule. So during the time that you have set here on a daily basis, anytime anyone tries to access your login URL, they'll just automatically be redirected to their homepage. So that means that they won't even be able to attempt to log in. And just so you know, if you have ever enabled this and then you're getting redirected from your homepage or from your login URL back to your homepage, just contact support and they'll give you the information that you need to temporarily disable the away mode protection. That way you can log into your site.
So question on away mode we had pop in a little bit ago. Janet asked, she said she had a client who locked themselves out by activating away mode. Is there a way to bypass that?
Yeah. If you go to the iThemes Help Center, you'll see a way to, there's like a constant on there. If you like, I think it might be under frequently asked questions. There is a way to disable all of the settings by adding a constant to your WP config.php file. You can also reach out to support and they can help you do that as well. You can also manually disable the plugin, but from the front end, there's no way to disable it. Also, however, if you're using sync, and you can go to the security tab. And then if away mode is enabled, you'll see an away mode option here, and then you can disable and enable it from here. Let's see if we can get that to show up here. Come on. Sometimes it takes a minute for them to communicate. Trying to refresh site info. And then, so there you can disable it from here, or you can manually disable the plugin. There's also a couple different options. Like there's a away mode.config and the away mode in the uploads directory that you can also remove that will temporarily disable it. All right, see, now here's away mode. And so you can turn it off from here if you need to.
Yep, there you go.
Any other questions before we move on?
So Janet, was that helpful? Yeah, Janet says she's saying she's using sync, and yeah, so that's a great way to deal with it right there.
Perfect. All right, now the next thing is the next module is going to be the main users module. This feature is what allows you to prevent people from continuing to access your site. So anytime an IP has reached the threshold for a ban, it gets added here. And this is what iThemes security will use to then create the rule in the HT access to ban your site or to ban that IP. And then let me see if I can just come up with a fake IP real quick. And then hopefully that'll just let me save that. Nope. Because it's invalid. But if there's like an IP here, or let's go ahead and enable the hack repair list to go back and address Paul's question from earlier. What the hackrepair.com blacklist feature is hackrepair.com. They've generated a list of known bad actors that once this is enabled, they'll automatically be added to the ban list for iThemes security. So, and then you can also manually add IPs here, and this is where iThemes security will automatically add IPs that have been banned. User agents, you can ban user agents here. One good thing about this might be going, Chrome is planning on, like I think in 2022, no longer using user agents. So here coming up, you might not even need to worry about this anymore. But once we save those settings, we should be able to go over here to the advanced page and then open up the server config rules. And so this is what you would copy and paste to your HT access, Paul, if you're trying to manually write them there, as opposed to letting iThemes security automatically write to the HT access for you.
Yep, but by using the default settings and allowing Security Pro to write to the HT access, you don't have to worry about that at all.
Nope, not ever.
And so a couple of things on that area where we just were. You meant there's a couple of terms that you use that I want to make sure we understand. The first was bad actor, and when we talk about that, we're not talking about David Hasselhoff. What is a bad actor as far as security is concerned?
A bad actor is anyone who is trying to attack your site. So it could be someone hitting too many 404s. It could be someone who got locked out from the too many invalid login attempts because they're trying to do a brute force attack on your site. And so once iThemes security records that malicious activity and it reaches a threshold that we talked about in the global settings, and it will be added to the ban list. So their IP will record their IP. Let's go back to the global settings. And once they hit the 3 lockouts, so they'll get locked out, they'll keep trying to log in, they'll get locked out again, they'll get locked out again. Okay, 3 locks out. That's it. 3 strikes, you're out. We're going to add you to the ban list, and now you can't even view our site. So that's what's going to happen. That bad actor who keeps trying to break into your front door, i.e. your WordPress login, nope, 3 strikes, you're out. You can't play ball anymore. I think I added a couple different metaphors into that, but hey, it works.
So we also saw the area of hosts, which is essentially IP addresses, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then at the bottom, there's user agents. And you talked about Chrome, but just explain briefly again, what is a user agent in this area?
Let's see here. Like, for example, let's take a look at this advanced page again real quick and look at the server configurables. And what we're looking at here is user agents. So a lot of times, like a site, like a Google bot, you'll see like Googlebot or like, and then so it'll be listed in your access log on the server. Along with the IP, you'll have this user agent that goes along with it. So it might be if you're having your site scanned by Security, the user agent will be security.net, and then it'll be followed by the Security IP. And so it's just a different way to identify people who are pinging or trying to access your site. And a lot of times it's easier to add the user agent because a single user agent might have multiple IPs. So by banning the user agent, you're covering a larger field of bad actors from, it's a broader brush of locking out that specific request coming from that specific person. So like, let's pretend that like the user agent is iThemes, and then you have different IPs. And let's say I'm one IP and Nathan's another IP. If you were to add the iThemes user agent, neither Nathan or I would be able to actually access your site.
Yep. But again, for most folks, the default settings are going to be just fine there.
Yeah, I'm just letting the IPs. It's for most people that's. I can honestly say that I have never added a user agent for one of my personal sites to that list. And the only time I've done it is for testing purposes only.
There you go. All right. Paul had a question in that same area about, does deleting an IP address out of the hosts list, does that update the HT access file as well?
Excuse me. Yes. Once you save the settings, it should trigger iThemes security to write to the HT access. And by write, I mean update it to remove it. So yes, Paul.
And Jesse was asking, why is the local IP, the 127.0.0.1 banned?
Where was that banned at?
Jesse, I'm not sure I saw that either.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
She said it's in the ban hosts on her site.
Oh, I wouldn't know. But you can take a look at your security logs and see, check why that IP has been added to the ban list. A lot of times that's just somehow, like, sometimes hosts are configured weird, and what that really is one of their physical pieces of hardware is pinging your site. I've only seen it like once or twice, honestly, and then I can't remember the exact scenario, so I'm just going to cut myself off because I don't want to give you any false information and have you connect dots that I was incorrect to put there. But typically, like when I have seen, it's been something to do with a weird configuration with the host.
Yeah,
but you can look in your security logs to see exactly why it was banned.
Yeah, and so Jesse's saying it's in Liquid Web Managed WordPress. So Jesse, I'd definitely check with them and see what's going on there. Christine is asking about settings and multiple different WordPress security plugins. Christine, it's always a good idea only to have one plugin doing each kind of job. So you don't, two different security plugins don't make your site more secure necessarily. They're probably going to cause more trouble than it's worth. So you want one security plugin, one backup plugin, etc. Otherwise, bad things start to happen.
Yeah, because most security plugins, so they're going to be I'm trying to think how. So sometimes security plugins handle how they lock people out in different ways. And once you choose one way to do it and the other plugin is trying to do it a different way, it's going to result in some type of conflict. And then beyond that, it's anytime you're using any plugin doing similar functions, it's usually a recipe for a bad time.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to the next section.
All right, database backups. What this is exactly what it sounds. It backs up your database. You can set up a schedule to do it, and you can create manual database backups. Now, this isn't backing up your full site. This isn't a full-featured backup, and you would there is no automatic way to do to restore using this backup. You're going to have to use either PHP, MyAdmin, or MySQL to actually restore your backup using this method. However, we want it there because it can add a certain level of protection if somehow some data gets corrupted, that you still have an option to be able to restore something. That being said, again, I just want to make it clear that it's not a full-featured backup. If you have any, it's not going to be able to restore any of the images on your site. This is kind of a last case scenario option for backups.
Right. So Christine's asking, she's asking if we have Backup Buddy. Do we need that? No. Backup Buddy is a much more robust backup plugin, and so you definitely want to use Backup Buddy over this feature. It's just there for folks who don't have another backup plugin, essentially.
Yep. Okay. Moving on, file change detection. What this will do is it will take a look at when files have updated, and they'll let you know when those files have updated. Now, just because you get a file change notification doesn't mean any malicious activity has happened on your site. It just wants you to make you aware of it. Now, if that change was unexpected, you can take a closer look to see what happened. And now some easy things that you might be able to rule out, like, was this plugin recently updated? Does that timeline of when this was when the file notification to the file was modified, does that correlate and with a plugin update? And then also you can enable the online file comparison. And what this will do is if any of your plugins or WordPress core files or any of your iThemes products have been updated, and then there have been a change to that file, what this will do is it will compare the file hash of the version of the plugin installed on your site, or the version of the plugin in the iThemes repo, or the WordPress.org repo. And if those file hashes match, typically means that you're in good shape, and then you won't actually receive a file change notification. However, if they don't match, you might want to take a closer look. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong, but it is one of those things that is a good thing to keep an eye out for. And yeah, and then ignore file type, similar to what we talked about in the 404 detection. This has a few more file types in there because these might be more apt to change anyways. And they're really they can't really execute PHP, so yeah, you should be good to go on that. All right.
So just one little note here from using iThemes security and using backups and so forth over the years. This is one of the reasons why we, for example, in my agency, do our WordPress updates the same time every week, because when we see the file change notifications, when you update a plugin, it's going to show up as a file change because the file has been changed. But if I know that, I did updates at this certain time and that's when the file change notifications are about, then I can just immediately know this is nothing to worry about. But if a file changed and it was a time when we didn't run updates, well, that's kind of a time that I really want to look into.
Another thing you could to think about is you can, over here is the files and folders exclude list. And it's a good idea when setting this up to exclude files that that are going to be changed a lot. That could be any logs, that could be your backup buddy logs or your backup directory. Like those are going to be expected to change. And so it'll just kind of quiet the noise, because like the last thing you want is to have so many alarms going off that you get you start ignoring them. That's not a good thing. So the good thing is to try to minimize the notifications as much as you can. So again, go ahead and exclude like your backups directory. Cache is another thing that's known to change a lot. Any kind of like security log or access log you can exclude, and that will help dampen some of the noise and minimize the amount of notifications you get. This file permission is just going to show your file permissions on the server versus the file permissions that the recommended file permissions. So you can see that like I could go in and change this from 775 to 755 to make it a little bit more restrictive. And then I could also change these to be a little bit more restrictive as well. And the rest of these are okay. Again, this is just a guideline. And we've had people in the past say, well, my host says it should be this. When in doubt, trust your host. They're going to be much more familiar with your environment and what are the requirements there, especially when it comes to file permissions. These, again, are just recommendations and not necessarily must-dos. If you can, go ahead and make those the follow the suggestions. But if not, again, it's these are recommendations. These aren't necessarily rules. And actually, our recommendations are more strict and restrictive than the WordPress.org recommendations. So just keep in mind these are recommendations. Local brute force protection. This is going to be what we talked about. This is looking at people trying to break into your site. So what a brute force attack is an attack that randomly tries to guess correct combination of username and password. And the reason why this is so important is that one of the most attacked parts of your site is going to be your WordPress login. And there's plenty of bots that go around because it's a super low barrier of entry, easy thing to create. It's just go attack the login, guessing random usernames and passwords. By default, WordPress has nothing to stop that limits the number of tries you get with the login. So this is important to make sure that you're logging out people who are continually trying to break into your site. The network brute force protection is what I talked about earlier. When we ran the security check and enabled this, is that it's the whole network of iThemes users working together to make the internet a little bit safe for our community. Password requirements, let's talk about this real quick. One of the best things you can do, especially for your privileged users, anyone who can make changes on your site, is requiring a strong password. It goes a long way in actually locking down and securing your site. And I'm going to share the story anyway. So I'm someone who's very conscious of this. My wife is someone who's not very conscious of this. She doesn't use a password manager. She doesn't use two-factor authentication. And she finally, last week, was the victim of having an account hacked and then a credit card opened in her name. She all of a sudden became a lot more interested in the things that I've been preaching to her in the past, but using a strong password and using a unique password on every site goes a long way of protecting your site. Another thing I want to highlight here is the refuse compromised passwords. Like, we actually went to this Have I Been Pwned API after her account got hacked, put it in her email address, and noticed that the account that she was using, or the information she was using, had been a part of 6 different database breaches. So the combination of WordPress, or sorry, not WordPress, the combination of username, email address, and password was known to bad actors in 6 different database breaches. So someone probably came across that and then was able to hack her account to log in and then create a credit card, to get a credit card. So that's a very, very good feature to have. And the have I been pwned, the refuse compromise password, excuse me 1 second. Sorry about that. The refuse compromise password serves two different things. One, if she didn't blame herself at first until I pointed out to her, she was blaming the company that had access to her account. She thought it was their fault. It wasn't. And so if you have any customers or clients accounts get hacked and they're using a bad password, they're going to blame you and not themselves. And so we can do by refusing compromised passwords that have been any compromise that appear in any of the database breaches on haveibeenpwned.com. One, it's going to inform them that they are using a compromised passwords, and that will notify them that, oh wow, I need to update my passwords everywhere. This is all of a sudden a little bit more real for me now that I know that my credentials are out there in the open for anyone to get. Then also protects you from them blaming you for their bad password. SSL, as you, like the site wasn't redirecting to HTTPS when we run that security check. And what this will allow you to do is to redirect all your pages to HTTPS if you have an SSL certificate installed. Now, the system tweaks, this has quite a few different settings in here. I'm just going to try to go through these pretty quickly. Protect file systems, prevent access to important files, and they won't be able to read them. So AC access in there, WP includes. These serve no purpose to the public and no reason to see this. Directory browsing doesn't allow people to take a look at different files or whatever if there's no index file included. Filter request methods, this filters out hits with trace or track request methods. Filter suspicious query strings. So like in the URL, there might be some extra code in that URL. These two combined do a good job of filtering that stuff out. Long URLs, like I know there were some Facebook hacks in the past that had like these super long like JavaScript that you could add to the URL that would then inject code in the browser, which then would allow people to take over people's accounts. This kind of protects you against that in case any of the plugins you have installed might have that vulnerability. Remove file writing permissions from your important files like the WP config and .htaccess. That means that people won't be able to go and add any malicious code to there or allow them to bypass any of the protections that you may have added there. You can disable PHP execution in these files. Now, there's no reason for PHP to actually be running here, and that helps to limit the amount of exploits opportunities people have on your site. I'm going to go through the WordPress tweaks real quick, and then I'll stop to see if I have any questions, just because we need to get through some of these. These I honestly wouldn't worry about. These are a little bit older methods of security. Most people aren't using these two technologies. Again, you'll know if you are, and know if you need to enable these. Reduce comment span. This helps reduce the number of comments with bots with no refer or no user agent ID. This isn't a perfect solution, and if you're worried about spam, I would recommend using a plugin like a Kismet, where that's going to be their main focus. Disable file editor. What this does is, like with your htaccess, your WP config, or any of your plugin file, you won't be able to use the WordPress file editor that you'll normally find in your WordPress settings. This means that you'll actually have to go and then edit those files in like a text editor and access that from the server level and not on WordPress, which is like the application level. So you go through via FTP, edit the file there, as opposed on the application level. And the reason why that's good to do, there's a lot fewer people that can have access to your server level than the amount of people that are able to log in and access the back end of your site. And then with the different privilege escalation, attacks out there where they can take the subscriber user role and then modify that user with like some kind of database injection to then make that user an admin user. If you take a look at the most recent iThemes vulnerability roundup, there was 2 different plugins that had that vulnerability. So that's another good reason why that's important to have enabled. The XML RPC is a method that you can use to send requests to WordPress. There's a thing that used to, or that allows, right here, multiple authentication attempts with XML-RPC. This, using XML-RPC, you can literally send 300 different combinations of usernames and passwords in a single attempt, a single login attempt using XML-RPC, which makes a way easier to have a successful brute force attack. Now, enabling this reduces the number of WordPress username and password guesses to 1 in a single XMLP request. That's super important. Restricted access for the WordPress, using the WordPress REST API will hide the list of users that is displayed when you use a particular URL that involves the REST API. Disable login error messages. This is the same setting that we mentioned. Does the same thing as the setting we mentioned when we were talking about the global settings. This will hide the default lockout messages, force a unique nickname. And what is good when you're doing this, it reduces the chance that people will be able to harvest WordPress usernames from the author pages to use in a brute force attack. And same with disabling extra user archives. If the post count on that user is 0, there's no reason why they should have an author's page, because then you can just put in the author page URL and then just keep changing the user ID number, and that will start to display the list of usernames. This just makes that not a thing for people with 0 post counts. This protects against tab napping. You can, in your settings, you can take a look at the article exactly what that is, and then enabling that just adds more security to your site and helps prevent people taking over your WordPress session. Logging in with email address or username. This allows you to choose what people are able to use when logging into your site. A lot of times people, like for example, on iThemes.com and iThemes Security, we have email address only because it's a little bit harder to guess an email address than it is just like a user. And also, if they are going to the author's page, it's not going to show your email address there, but it may show your username. And again, just trying to strengthen your WordPress login as much as you possibly can. And then mitigate an attachment file traversal attack. This is not that long ago, there was a vulnerability in WordPress that's now been patched, but this was to mitigate against that, where people were able to could actually delete different things on your WordPress site through a vulnerability, and that helps mitigate against that. Sorry, I had to run through this a little bit quick.
There's a lot of
slow.
Yeah, there's a lot of settings there. People are asking what is the default recommendation for a lot of those settings. And it really, folks, it just depends on your site and what you're trying to do. There was a good little chat going there for a minute in the chat room about the long URL, the long query string setting in the system tweaks. And depending on what's going on with your site, you know, for the average site, you can probably check that, but some sites are using a long query string. And for those of you who don't know what a query string is, like right there in the URL of Michael's browser, when you see that question mark, something equals something and something and something, that's a query string. If the little question mark there is the query, starting the query string. And, you know, it depends on what your site is doing. Some sites on the, you know, they're using different plugins or whatever, and there's going to be a long query string. Yeah, like yes, for talking to Stripe and that sort of thing, and other things. If that's a problem, don't check that setting. That's why it's not enabled by default.
Yep.
As far as now, just for what it's worth, on a typical site, all of the system tweak settings are checked for me. If there's something peculiar about a site that requires one of those to be unchecked, then I'll uncheck it. But in general, in the base settings, all the system tweaks are checked, and all the default recommendations and checkboxes in the WordPress settings are checked for me normally. But then again, it just depends on the site.
And the idea isn't necessarily to enable every single feature of the plugin. The idea is to enable as many of the features as your environment will be allow. And there's so many different environments out there that like you don't necessarily need to enable everything to have to feel secure and protected. It's like I hate when people get stressed out when there's a setting that they can't enable because like their host or whatever in their environment won't allow it. They're using Stripe, so they're constantly going to have query strings over 256 characters. That's okay. That doesn't mean you're in any more danger. It just doesn't. You don't have. A lot of times this stuff is like super edge case, and we're protecting against super edge case, where the likelihood of you being attacked using that edge case is slim to none. But we want to have that there for people who can use it. That doesn't mean it needs to cause you any anxiety whatsoever.
Yep, for sure. So there was another question from Cheesehead in the system tweaks about the disabling PHP in plugins and themes. And I've heard this question quite a bit. And the worry is always, if I check that, does that mean my plugins are going to quit working because they have PHP in them and the themes the same way? What's going on there?
No, because they're not actually executing. I know it sounds weird, but they're not actually, the code is actually not running in the directory, like from that directory. So that code will actually run on a different page. So the other page will link to it and then run it on the page.
So the difference is somebody can't type in the direct name of a PHP file in your theme or plugin and try to run it. The plugin has to be executed from WordPress itself, rendering a page. But a hacker might try to upload a malicious PHP file into your plugin or into a WordPress directory, theme directory, and then try to access it directly. And that's what this is stopping.
Thank you for explaining that so much better than me. I love having Nathan for backup.
We had one more question from Paula in the password requirements section about the password expiration. She was asking about password duration and what the recommended is there.
Depending on who you ask, my personal opinion, I don't enable this, and here's why. Just because a password reaches a certain length and age, if it's a unique password and it's a strong password, age isn't going to make it any weaker. It being new isn't going to make it any fresher. And I'd rather have people use strong passwords and then not bother them to have to update this every single 30 days, because once they have to update it every single 30 days, it's going to, in my experience, that has made people less excited about adding new passwords. And again, this is my personal opinion, but yeah, I tend to steer clear with that one. What about you, Nathan? Like, what do you normally enable?
Yeah, so for admin users, there's a default setting, I think, of 120, and that I'll usually do that.
Mm-hmm.
But for subscribers is too much. But requiring the admin to reset their password every 120 days is not a bad idea.
And how it does protect you is like, I take it from the pros that like I expect best behavior, and then unfortunately you can't expect other people to do best behavior. And at least, like let's say that my wife, as I talked about earlier, luckily she doesn't watch these things, but she would be a good person to have password expiration on, because that would make it much harder for her to use that same password that was involved in those 6 different database breaches. So so it can be useful. Okay, magic links. So what is great about this, let's say that you have a client that constantly gets locked out because for whatever reason they constantly enter in the incorrect password. What this does, once this is enabled, they're able to send themselves an email with a link that allows them to bypass their lockout. And another instance is very useful is if their username has been part of a brute force attack. Their username will be locked out once it reaches the requirements for a ban, which is a good thing. You want that username to be locked out to prevent them from continuing to able to make guesses and login attempts with a valid username. But the thing that you need to keep in mind about security is that you want it to protect your site while staying out of your way. And so this won't inhibit people this will allow you to lock out usernames without inhibiting people to come in and do what they came there for, whether it's buy something on your site or to publish a new post. Malware scan scheduling, once you enable this, your site will automatically be scanned twice a day to check for malware. And then you can see the scan results for that in the logs. Passwordless login.
Now, I'm sorry, Michael, let me interrupt you. Before we get past the malware scanning, I know that's been a problem for some folks. Barbara was asking earlier about what do you do with a reported unable to properly scan your site 403 forbidden when you haven't done anything to cause that?
Well, yeah, you probably haven't done anything to cause that. But what happens is security will purposely hit 404s when scanning your site. So they're purposely hitting like known weak points. And so if they hit a 404, guess what? That's a great thing. That means that particular file isn't there, and you don't have to be concerned about it. And then so what you can do is you can take a look at. I think we have the security IPs in the Help Center doc. And you can add your IPs to the whitelist there. You can make sure that your host has added the IPs to the whitelist because they see that type of behavior. Your host may have added them to the whitelist or may have added them to the blacklist. There's several different things that could be the result of 403s. For example, there was one British host that used the same IP for all their different clients. And then unfortunately, that host had people using that IP for malicious behavior. And so security actually banned the IP from being scanned because it was like, okay, we don't need this IP that's a known bad actor. Like we have proof that there's been malicious behavior coming from this IP. We're not going to allow them to monitor our scan techniques. So they got completely banned. So unfortunately, I can't give you that exact answer because there's so many different, when you are connecting your site to security, there's so many different stops along the way that could be causing the 403. But you can take a look at the logs once you have the security IPs to see if you can find any reason why they're getting logged out or they're banned there. Then you can go with your host, and that's definitely where I would start.
Yep, great information.
Okay, passwordless login is a new way to log in. We did a webinar about this, and there's also a post on iThemes and YouTube. So we won't go too far into this, but what's great about this is it allows you to enable those strong password requirement features, and it allows you to enable two-factor, and you can allow people to log in with a link from their email address. So you have all the benefits of strong restrictions and strong requirements to log into the site without causing any extra requirements on the actual user yourself. So like we talked about earlier, if someone's account gets hacked, they're most likely going to blame you, but you also don't want them to have any usability issues when visiting or trying to make a purchase or trying to log in if you have a membership site to access any of the content there. But so you make it easy so they're able to log in with a click from their email address while locking down their site. So like brute force attack, no one's going to be able to get in that way, because two-factor, there's a long, Google said that it prevents against if you're using two-factor authentication, it prevents or protects you against 100% of brute force attacks. Like that's just it. Like it's 100% effective against brute force attacks if you're using two-factor on your account. I like 100%, and I have that written linked to in a I think it might be the passwordless login article that I wrote. Okay, sorry. And then reCAPTCHA, what this does is Google's reCAPTCHA. The newest version is version 3, and what this is going to do is going to it's going to watch all the background activity of the users. If you have it on, you can have it do it on all pages. And if it starts thinking like, "Ooh, this behavior seems kind of weird," we'll go to lock them out. For example, I was using Safari's autofill function, and I got locked out because even that automation made it even more strict, or it triggered the lockout. So what I had to go in and do, because I like using autofill features, because I like having secure passwords but not having to manually type them in, had to go and change this to 1 to kind of loosen up the restrictions a little bit and make it a little bit more friendly when it comes to autofill passwords. But that's just no site keys. That's good. So this is just another good thing that you can add to add protection to your site. Now, the settings import and export module allows you to, you can either export, once you have this site configured, you can create an export to then import on other sites, or you can import settings from another site to this, and that'll help save you on some of the configuration time. Now, keep in mind that not every setting is designed to be exported and imported. Recaptcha keys can be unique depending on server and URL, so don't want to necessarily import those and accidentally lock you out of your site.
No, but just real quick before you move on, I think that's a super helpful feature, because if you set the settings once for generally what you're going to do for all the sites that you manage, if you're a person that manages multiple sites, do it once, save that setting, and then you can just import it to every site.
If you're using Sync, you can do that from Sync as well. And then the security dashboard is a cool, refresh now that it's enabled. The security dashboard is a cool feature that allows you to get the information that you, the exact information that you want at the time, or the important information that you want at the time. And so you can see the different information about your users. If there's any locked out, any banned users, we can see that since we enabled the now, since we enabled the scan, we were scanned and it's clean. So that's good. And so again, we did a webinar about this, YouTube video about this, and there's also something in the blog post about that as well that you can take a look at for more information. And then let's keep going, trucking along. Oh, I skipped over privilege escalation. Privilege escalation is cool because, like, let's say that you have some vendor logging onto your site to help troubleshoot whatever they need to do. You can create an like a generic like support user that's typically a subscriber, and then you can go into the profile settings of that particular user and then temporarily escalate that user for a certain amount of time to admin privileges. So once it expires, it automatically goes down to subscriber. And that just minimizes the chance of, if that user, that typically unused account, ever does get hacked, it will minimize their ability to make any changes or do any real damage on your site. Two-factor authentication.
Sorry. If we can't, I'm sorry. I just want to underline once again that the privilege escalation feature, because how many of us, you set up an admin user for some support person, and then you forget, and you come back to the site a year later, and that admin user is still there, right? That's a big bad thing to do. So this will let you automatically turn that account off after a certain amount of time. Super, super helpful. There's also another question that popped in about, hey, the security dashboard isn't showing up on one site. And BG, I would suggest just make sure the version of iThemes security is correct, and that it's the pro version and not the free version of iThemes security. Because if it's pro and the most recent version, it should be appearing, right, Michael?
Yep. Oh, and then you also need to make sure that you're on WordPress. What was the Gutenberg version?
I believe it has to be WordPress 5.0 and higher.
Yeah. Okay, and then two-factor authentication. This is great. It requires an additional step to log in, which is awesome. It's a great way to secure your site. And then what ties into this, once you enable trusted devices, which you can then configure from here, you can come back to your two-factor authentication settings, and then you'll see a allow remembering device setting. So now you can do all users, and you can now people have the option to say, hey, remember this device for 30 days. Don't ask me for another two-factor code for 30 days. And so that's a great way to encourage people to use it, because you get that protection, but you minimize the requirements on people to use two-factor. So anything we can do to get more people using two-factor, the better. User logging is great. It's like the audit log. Keeps track of different activity people are performing on the site, whether it's publishing a post, whether it's installing a plugin, deactivating a plugin, you'll be able to see a list of that activity in the WordPress security logs. And the user security check, what this is, it will take a look at the different users on your site, see if they're using two-factor or not. I just installed security on the site today. This is just a little site that we have for webinars, but it'll tell you the strength of the password and when they're last active. I have 2 different sessions. One of my sessions is probably the fact that I have sync open right now. But you can log, if you see that there's multiple sessions in your account, you can log out everywhere just to be on the safe side, and that will then end all the different active WordPress sessions. And then version management is great because one of the number one reason why sites get hacked is because of outdated plugins. And so you can automatically install the latest versions of WordPress, latest plugin update, latest theme updates. And then you can come to here and do a custom list. So if you have some plugins that you don't want to automatically update because you're concerned that there might be some kind of conflict on your site, you can delay that update for a specific period of time until you have time to see if anyone's been able to report any bugs with that particular release, or if you want to test it on the staging site that you have created, you can go ahead and click delay. And then set the number of days that you want to do it, or you can just disable it completely. No, and this is great. So like, take a look at the vulnerability roundup. There's enough vulnerabilities every single month that we do 2 a month. And then this last one had 18 new plugin, total plugin and theme vulnerabilities that were disclosed. So the more that you can just assure that you get that important security patch, that is great. And the great report, this is good for really you. If you're the site owner, you're the site manager, this just gives you some things that you can do to strengthen the security of your site. These are just different recommendations of different things that you can do, whether it be refusing compromised passwords, or are you using a good version of PHP or WordPress. You get dinged here if you had a version of PHP that is out of date. And then, so you can see these different things of why you got what grade, and it's just good recommendations of things you can do to strengthen the security on your site. I don't like the fact that there's a grade here because it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing something wrong. It means that you are comfortable. These are things that you can do to like just strengthen your site. But if there's certain things that you don't feel comfortable doing or that won't work on your environment, that's okay. This doesn't have to be an A+. These are just recommendations to help strengthen your site. And then, so real quick, let's just take a look at the logs, and then we'll open up for questions. So there's different tabs here. So you can click on all events, and this will show you everything that's happened to your site. And you can also go to this drop-down menu to see of different changes to narrow down to specific categories of log entries. You can also go to the screen options over here, and you can do some additional options right here. But I am ready for any questions you guys may have.
Yeah, absolutely. I have one question left in the queue here that was asked earlier that we'll get to in just a moment. If you have questions that you hadn't gotten answered yet or that I missed, apologize for that. Just drop them again in the chat room and we'll get those over to Michael. BG had a question early on about, it's under the trusted devices section, about the MaxMind GeoLight integration. Yeah, right there. Yeah. And so there's the license key, and BG's question is, should we use one account for all customer sites or one per site uniquely?
That is up to you. My recommendation would be to create a key for the client, if that makes sense. So you can sign
per
up here
site.
and then so per site, and then that way it is under their information instead of your information. So if you ever need to pass on the site for whatever reason, you're not managing it anymore, it just limits the amount of stuff you have connected to their site.
Yeah, for sure. And you're starting to have to register this MaxMind key as well for WooCommerce sites. That's with the newest version of WooCommerce. What I've started to do is you definitely want a different license key for every site, for sure. But I've started stacking all those under my account. But that's neither here nor there. But you can have multiple license keys under a single account, and those are free, so it's not a huge deal. You just have to license it.
And the reason why you have to sign up for it now is because that's now a requirement of the CCPA in order to as far as like the right to be forgotten, and you have to know who you're giving the information to. So yeah, we had to add that here as well, and now require you to actually do an account.
Right, exactly. And CCPA, for anybody that is not aware, that's the first GDPR-ish regulation instituted by the state of California here in the United States. And so all those things are coming stateside now. So, all right. I don't see any other questions that have popped in the chat room. We'll do one more last call, but as we're circling back around to the end here, Paul has a question. For just a general security question. For many sites, Paul says he has a username with an exclamation point in the username. This is not allowed when you create a username. I do it in the database. Is that okay?
Yeah. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with it. Like, I don't know. Yeah, I think so. Nathan, do you know otherwise?
I don't know, Paul. Man, you're mystifying everybody here. I don't know. It's probably a filter there in the WordPress add user page that doesn't allow punctuation in a username. But yeah, I mean, I don't know why it wouldn't work. It's probably just that initial filter to create the user where they don't want a punctuation for some reason. But yeah, once it's there, it's there. The username you enter is going to match the password. So interesting. All right. I believe that's it, Michael. Thanks very much. You want any last words as you're getting ready to wrap this up?
Yeah. Just thank you guys very much for showing up. And next month, Nathan and I are going to be the last week of next month. We're going to be doing a disaster week. So that's disaster week preparation. The first day is going to be about prevention. The second day is going to be about recovery. The third day is about managing client, which is what Nathan's going to be handling. But yeah, so I hope to see you guys there, and thank you guys. I really appreciate you guys showing up and listening to me ramble on today.
All right. Lots of settings, lots of checkboxes, and lots of security for your site with iThemes Security Pro. I have just updated the webinar page for this event with links to the passwordless login webinar and blog post that Michael referenced earlier, as well as the webinar on the iThemes security dashboard we did when that was first released quite some time ago. So if you visit let me just copy this, the link to that particular webinar right there, that's the same as the replay link will be in just about an hour. The video will be on that page as well, but you can see those links and go back and check out some of those webinars that were referenced in here as well. Well, that's it, folks. Thanks for hanging out with us for the last hour or so. Hopefully you've learned a few things. I appreciate you, Michael, for being with us and sharing your knowledge. Hope it was a good investment of everybody's time. Again, my name is Nathan Ingram from everybody here at iThemes. Hope you have a great rest of the week, a great weekend, and we'll see you next time here on iThemes Training, where we go further together.